So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program on North American bird declines and what we can do to help. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager with the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Tonight's talk is part of our summer reading program, so I wanted to say a few words about that program. We have programs for all ages as part of summer reading, and this year's theme is Tales and Tales. So that's T-A-I-L-S and T-A-L-E-S. So we have a lot of programs about and book recommendations about animals, the outdoors, and storytelling. You can sign up for the program at any of our branches or on the bookmobile, or you can sign up online. And I went ahead and put the link to sign up in the chat. You can sign up online, you can print your reading trackers at home, or you can sign up and then come into one of our branches to get a paper tracker if you prefer. For grown-ups this year, all you need to do is read 3 books, write 3 very short, very unintimidating book reviews, and then do 7 activities. And when you finish, you get a mug and you're entered into drawings for a Kindle Fire or bookstore gift cards. A couple of upcoming summer reading events I want to make sure to tell you about. The first is called Missouri Lakes, Plumbing the Depths, and that is next week, Tuesday, June 22nd at 6:30, and that is via Zoom. And a representative from the Lakes of Missouri Volunteer Program will talk to us about the aquatic inhabitants of our Missouri lakes and talk about the importance of water ecology, as well as how you can get involved as a volunteer, helping to monitor the quality of our lakes. So I'll put the link to that event in the chat. And then the other event next week is Discover Nature with Runge Nature Center, and that is on Thursday, June 24th. And that's kind of a lunchtime program. That's at 1 via Zoom. And at this program, Austin Lambert, who is the naturalist at Runge Nature Center in Jefferson City, will talk to us about some of the animals we may encounter in our travels around the state this summer. So I encourage you to attend one or both of those events if you are interested. Before I introduce today's presenter, I just want to go over a few Zoom housekeeping items. On your Zoom screen, if you hover over the Zoom window or if you tap, if you're on a tablet or a phone, you'll see, among other things, a chat bubble icon. You can ask a question using chat. I'll keep an eye on those questions, and then at the end of the presentation, I will ask Sarah to address those. If you're brave and you'd rather use your microphone to ask a question at the end of the presentation, you can use that raise hand tool to let me know you want to be unmuted to ask your question. So this evening, we are very pleased to have with us, again, this is twice she's been with us via Zoom this year, Sarah Kendrick. Sarah is your state ornithologist with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and she loves her job. I don't blame her. It sounds like a fun job. She is a Missouri native who earned her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Missouri, studying avian response to savanna and woodland management in the Missouri Ozarks. She coordinates and oversees statewide bird conservation plans with partners. She serves on multiple regional, national, and international migratory bird conservation coalitions, coordinates the brown-headed nuthatch reintroduction projects with partners, coordinates the Great Missouri Birding Trail, and serves as the Missouri contact for all things bird within the department and for the public. And Sarah and her husband, Kip, have an awesome 5-year-old son, Abram, and they love birding, hiking, camping, and just being outside. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I wish I could see everybody, but I can't see anything as the presenter, so I apologize. But thanks for the invitation and having me back. It's always fun to talk to the library audience. We love the Daniel Boone Regional Library, and we're doing summer reading program. So check it out. So thanks again for the invitation. I'm very excited to talk to you kind of at length. I've really only given short versions of this presentation before. Short 15-minute, which is way too fast for this topic. So it's very nice to be able to chat with you about it. It's very important and near and dear to my heart, and near and dear to a lot of my job duties right now is North American bird declines and what we can do to help. So you may not be aware of the bird declines. Oh, I gotta use I'll make it so you can't see that black bar at the top every single time I click. So this all began of the big bird decline news items began in July of 2019. And so many of us were at an American Ornithological Society meeting in Alaska. And this State of Canada's Birds report came out. So every few years, North America puts out a State of the Birds report through NABC, which is the North American Bird Conservation Initiative. So they put out a state of Canada's birds and then state of North American or US birds. And so that report had just come out right before this big meeting, which has all these ornithologists from all over the continent coming together and giving scientific talks and workshops about bird conservation and ornithology, all sorts of ornithological topics. So this had just come out. So we saw this on like nearly everybody's presentation, and this was very drastic. So this is Canada birds, but it showed an increase in 150% in the guild of waterfowl species, and then an increase of 110% of birds of prey. So that was good, positive news in those groups of species. But you can see many of these other groups are either right in the middle or they're sharp declines. So especially in the grassland bird guild and aerial insectivores, which means birds that catch insects and eat insects on the wing, which is many, many species, they are down over 57 or 59%. This time scale is the last 50 years since 1970. So that happened, and that was quite depressing, seeing that at talks over and over and over again. Well, fast forward to September of 2019, and we got this big gut punch, which was an article in the journal Science by Rosenberg et al. And it quantified North American bird declines since 1970 over the last 50 years. And so this gathered together data from the Breeding Bird Survey, which is a North American survey that's conducted every year since 1970. People go do bird survey routes in one morning, and they do the same route every single year. And so there's this long-term data set since 1970. It also used data from the Christmas bird count, which is a non-breeding survey census that is conducted to try and track these large-scale bird changes in bird populations over time. Well, it did exactly that because they used a lot of that data for this paper. So it quantified net loss of birds since 1970, and they found a net loss of about 3 billion birds, or about 29% of our North American birds since 1970 in the last 50 years. That's very precipitous. Those are very fast declines. And so these are a few figures from that article. In figure A there, that's the total change in billions of birds. So you see that precipitous drop. These are also, I have to mention that like the top ornithological minds in North America all came together as authors on this paper. You see, it wasn't just one person, it was a large group of people. These are all key people from the US and Canada and beyond who came together and found this. John Sauer, you see, is like the fourth author on there. He coordinates the Breeding Bird Survey. So folks from these large scale databases and survey efforts were part of this. And so you see in figure B there that those are declines since 1970 in millions of birds separated by those habitat guilds of species you see on the right, color coded. So then when we look at figure C here, you see the black axis, that vertical axis in the middle. Everything to the left of that that's in the box right now, that's -% change since 1970. And so when you look at the last group of birds there at the bottom, oops, those are grassland birds in the brown. And we've lost over 53%, well, about 53% of our grassland birds. And so they've separated these out by habitat here to show the differences there between species tied to those habitats. And there's just a lot of negative trends. However, I do want to point out that wetland birds are increasing. You see them on the top in the blue. And that is the product over time of concerted conservation efforts. And so that proves to us that while that we're seeing many of these declines, focused conservation efforts and focused money, a lot of which came from waterfowl hunters, and targeted conservation efforts like that through Ducks Unlimited and other things have caused this change, this increase in wetland birds due to wetland conservation efforts to preserve that habitat. Then you help and preserve the species. So it shows us conservation works. We just need to retool it for a lot more species now. So another reason for hope is the phenomenal response that the world had to the publication of this paper. So this story, which was again in the journal Science, it's a nerdy peer-reviewed publication, right? Nerdy in a good way. It reached over 1,700 media outlets across the world. And that's a lot. I don't know of any other scientific article, at least about birds or nature or natural resources, that has had that reach. It reached 3.8 billion people, is the media reach that they estimate. And it had a broad appeal across political spectrums. It wasn't just one party or the other. It's the outdoors, that connects with people regardless of any of those things. So it reached a ton of people and a lot of media outlets. So an interesting thing about this article also was that simultaneously with this article going through publication and getting accepted, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is like the premier, it's tied to Cornell University, but the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is also a nonprofit organization tied to the school. And they are like the top ornithologists who do, a lot of ornithological research. They do a ton of outreach and education efforts that are free and online to help you learn about birds and bird ID. So while the paper was being published, they built these infographics to help spread the word and tell the public that this was happening, that birds were declining, and that we need your help. So they made these really beautiful graphics. There's one on grassland birds, one on eastern forest birds, one on migratory birds. And one thing I want to point out is that with grassland birds in particular, we're not talking about just rare, obscure species here. We're talking about common, what we feel are common birds like eastern meadowlarks, where they're found nearly everywhere. And even them, we've lost 3 and 4 of those birds, with an overall decline of 53% of grassland birds as a guild. And so that's a lot. And I'm starting off heavy here, but it gets positive. It gets more positive. Don't worry. Just starting off with the gut punch like we all got with that article. So again, the North American Bird Conservation Initiative, they're kind of a group of groups. So they bring together federal and state agencies, NGOs, all together, land managers, education folks, lots of people in the bird world, and they move forward bird conservation efforts over a continental scale. And so what they did in the wake of this article is they created infographics about why the heck humans should even care about birds in the first place, because we realize we're starting at a level where much of the population, much of the public doesn't know why we should care. And so they are working to educate on that piece of it. And so they made these infographics that talk about bird habitat supports clean water, which is very important. Their habitats support clean water. And so supporting bird habitat supports many other things in the system. Birds are good for the economy. Bird watchers spend about $100 billion, which is a lot. And there's a lot of people who are wildlife watchers and bird watchers, and they spend a lot of money with lodging and travel and gas and hotels and food. Maybe not in the last year during COVID, but they spend quite a bit of money. Birds in their habitat support your health. There are a lot of studies, especially right now, linking nature to health, that the more time you spend outside and activities doing outside, you're just, you have better physical health and can decrease your stress, like it says in the infographic. And then bird habitat boosts property values as well. And if you're motivated by coffee or wine, birds also help that too. They really assist in pest control, which is very important. For the record, birds eat 400 to 500 million tons of insects per year. Every single year. Lauren looked surprised, but she thought that was like, ever. Nope, that's annually. So just imagine what havoc that would wreak on ag systems, on us as humans, on our lawns, on all. It's hard to even wrap our minds around those numbers. There's a lot of birds out there and they do a lot of good for ecosystem. That's just one ecosystem service. Okay, so at the same time that this article was released, you can see that this is one of the few times that a scientific article of this magnitude also paired with communications staff at Cornell, because they launched all this educational content at the same time as the scientific article. That does not happen, and it needs to happen more in the future, because this is, especially with findings with this much gravity, it's very important to get the public, get that information to the public. So at the same time as this came out, they launched the 7 simple actions to help birds, because the authors knew that this story would alarm people. Well, hopefully alarm them into calls to action, right? And then many would be asking, well, what can we do about it? So they worked for a year behind the scenes on this website and on those infographics to give the public some simple actions about what they can do now. So that's the outline of my talk, is to cover these 7 simple actions and chat about them a little bit. Yeah, and please feel free to ask questions at the end. No question is a stupid question. I like dialogue, so please don't feel nervous at all to unmute at the end either and ask those good questions. So at the same time that these came out, there's a bird-friendly coalition that just formed, and they're trying to make bird-friendly actions more approachable, and they provide these media packets. It's from the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And so they provide these really pretty infographics. So along the way with these 7 simple actions, I'll show you these little, they're kind of like GIFs, like little mini videos that they've created to help outline the 7 simple actions. And I imagine they were made in the exact shape of a PowerPoint slide. So I imagine they want us to use them in this way. So I'm putting them to good use. So that's what those are. You see these little videos. I did not make them, but they're really cute. Okay. So naturally, when we're thinking of ways to curb human-caused threats to birds and bird mortality, we look at the human-related threats to birds. So according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, these are the leading causes of human-related threats to birds. So you can see that by far in the blue portion of the pie, the cats are the largest, both feral and free-roaming cats are the largest contributor to wild bird mortality, followed by collisions with building glass. So naturally, those threats will be addressed in the 7 simple actions because we're following the data in that way. So we can all make a difference in all of these, but I will cover a few of these. But I think it's important for us to see those human-related threats to birds. There are naturally many other contributors to these bird declines. You know, the ornithological world is kind of scrambling right now to identify those smoking guns of what's causing these bird declines. And to be very honest, it's very different for many different species. So 1/3 of Missouri's birds that breed here in the state leave the country completely in the non-breeding season. So they're out of the US borders for up to 8 months of the year. And so not only are they facing threats during migration on up to like 1,000 miles or more twice a year. So those are a lot of threats, just trying to stay alive and have the energy, fighting storms, things like that during migration. When they're on the breeding grounds here, they have their own set of threats. And then when they're down in Mexico, Central America, or South America, or the Caribbean, they have a whole nother set of threats. So especially for migratory birds, there are threats everywhere, but there are things that we can do associated with these human-related threats that we can all do something little at some sort of scale today to help birds. And I really do feel in my heart that that's what it's going to take to help curb these bird declines, is all of us doing something, even if it's just little, to help nature and birds, and for us to see any real change. So this is our first little infographic video. There's our Smithsonian logo at the back. So there's a bird in a window. So it says, turn lights out and treat windows to keep birds safe. So live bird friendly. Okay, so prevent window collisions is our first one. And so this is an easy and relatively inexpensive way to prevent bird death. So birds see reflected vegetation, trees, and sky in windows reflected, and they see it as a pass-through. They think they can just fly right through the window because they see that vegetation. They just think it's another tree right next to their tree. So they fly over to it. They fly a lot faster than we think, and they slam into that glass, and they either get stunned for a while and fly off and potentially have brain injuries, or sometimes they just die. The impact is too much. They don't wake up. And it's very sad. And all of us have had this happen at our house somewhere at some window. So this is a relatively easy fix. If you have that problem window at your home or at the office where you work, where you'll see a dead bird or 2 or 5 or 10 each migration season, all of that adds up. You know, think of how many billions of homes there are on the landscape, how many big office buildings with big like glass windows are out there. So all of that adds up. So that's what makes it the second largest contributor to wild bird death, is there's just a lot of glass on the landscape because there's a lot of human impacted areas. And so if you place opaque stickers or hanging threads or screens on the outside of windows, all of those will tell the bird that that's not a pass-through, that that's something hard and that they can't fly through it. So there's lots of different options for this. You can see here these opaque stickers. You can see here in the middle, again, these hanging kind of weighted threads. So it's just something to break up that reflection so the bird knows that it's not a tree or the sky. And then on larger scales, if you're in like a bigger home or office building, you can get these little dots and films that you can place on the outside. So this is a picture of my office building. It's the office next door to my office. But right outside here in that tree, I'm pointing, but you can't see me. But if I move my mouse, that little bar comes up. So in that tree right outside the window, there's a bird feeder. And we had 2 or 3 birds hit the window just because it's near a feeder. There's a lot more bird activity there. And they were flying into the window and either dying or getting stunned. And so I purchased these opaque stickers, this bird tape. It's in a big long roll, and I just cut off squares. You can see in the previous slide that they have it in a checkerboard pattern, but you don't need the stickers to be that close together. It doesn't have to break up your reflection that much. I put them about 18 inches apart, and we never had a bird strike those windows again, just because they saw that it wasn't a pass through. This is my office at the department. Yes, I have a stuffed squirrel. It's the first thing I ever hunted with my dad, and I thought it would be funny to get it mounted. Yeah, anyway, so his name is Asiago. Anyway, I digress. So this is my window at work, and I had a brown creeper fly into my window. It's the only bird I've ever had fly into this window, but how am I supposed to know? I'm not at the office every single day, right? So there could have been many more. But I put up these stickers, never had a bird fly into the window again. So this is a real solution. It's very easy. It's a one-time fix. You're out there for a day putting things up, and then there's results that you never actually even see because the birds won't be hitting the window anymore. And then I had someone reach out to me. I was so happy about this. I had someone reach out to me at work saying that, oh, I saw some bird feathers and dust on the glass, which is an indicator that the bird flew into the window. And these are these enclosed courtyards with windows all around at our office, which was built in about the 70s. This is the office in Jefferson City. And so I asked the maintenance folks to put up these stickers, and they did, and it's fixing the problem. It's just, all this is pretty low maintenance. So there are 2 really cool programs by the Missouri River Bird Observatory. They've partnered with Burroughs Audubon Society in Kansas City and the St. Louis Audubon Society to create Bird Safe KC and Bird Safe St. Louis programs. So what these programs do is they train volunteers to walk some of the large office buildings in urban areas, both in Kansas City and the urban centers in downtown. They walk around these large high rises, and they count the number of dead birds that they find at the bottom of the building, because they are numerous sometimes, especially during spring and fall migration, when there are just millions of birds in the sky moving through an area. So the chances of birds flying into windows, especially at a time of high stress, when they're hungry and they're traveling long distances, they're more susceptible to that. So they're trained in bird ID and go around and count the birds that they find at the bottom of these buildings. The point of this is not to go after these building owners and vilify people or tell all buildings in these downtown areas, treat your windows or else. The point is to identify hotspots or buildings that just have windows that are just placed the right way for birds to think it's a pass through. And so to target buildings that are, maybe having the most bird collisions and asking them to treat their windows. So it's based on data. So this is just from one day during September, during migration, where birds were found early in the morning, likely migrating at night. So there's other programs called Lights Out. There are Lights Out programs across the country, and they work with cell towers, high rises. They encourage red lights that blink on buildings at night or towers, rather than a white light that's on constantly or a red light that's on constantly, because during migration, birds can be drawn to lights for whatever reason. So artificial light can attract them during migration, clearly, and then they collide with the lighted building or the tower. And so Lights Out Heartland is a collaboration of organizations from within Missouri and the Midwest to reduce light pollution and ask buildings to make their lights intermittent or turn them off during certain times of year. And so on the ABC, American Bird Conservancy website, they have a fantastic website about how to treat your windows. They have looked at all of these anti-bird collision products, and they've ranked them in level of effectiveness. So it's amazing. So if you just Google ABC window bird collision, it'll take you to this database where you can scroll through all these products, and it tells you how good they are, what their rank is, all of this stuff. So they provide a lot of different solutions, like paint your windows or put bird silhouettes on it, or put, the little stickers up top there you see, like I did. So there's a bunch of different options it provides you, both for residential and at a business. So we're going on to our next simple action. A bird's got a nice mansion in that tree. Just saying. Plant native plants to shelter and nourish birds. Okay, so plant natives. This is one of my favorite ones. It's probably the most impactful thing you can do for birds long-term in your yard or on your property. So luckily in Missouri, the Missouri Prairie Foundation runs the Grow Native program. So Grow Native helps you learn about a ton of varieties of native plants, shrubs, and trees. Don't forget your shrubs and trees. They have a massive database about where you can find native plants, when to plant them, when they bloom, what they look like, which ones are best for pollinators, which ones are best for a bird-friendly garden, it's amazing. It's a very extensive database. So we're very lucky to have the Missouri Prairie Foundation to coordinate the Grow Native program. And this is one of the metal signs that they sell on the Missouri Prairie Foundation website. You can put it in your yard to help educate others. So this talks about native habitat. And the point of why native plants are good for birds is that native plants attract native insects, which help feed native birds. And so all of that is very important because even if birds are granivorous, which means they eat seeds throughout the year, all of them feed insects to their young. So pretty much all birds need insects at some point. And so this shows you that cycle. So Doug Tallamy is an entomologist and an author at the University of Delaware, and he wrote a pretty awesome book years ago. It's probably 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. He wrote Bringing Nature Home. And so his main crusade is encouraging people to plant native plants and get rid of your manicured, perfect looking yards that don't provide a whole lot for ecosystems and for native wildlife. So one of the quotes from his book is he says, we've allowed alien plants to replace natives all over the country. Our native animals and plants cannot adapt to this gross and completely unnatural manipulation of their environment in time. So they can't adapt fast enough to negate the consequences. So their only hope for a sustainable future is for us to intervene to right the wrongs that we have perpetrated. So that's very weighty, but pretty much he's saying that we've replaced so many native plants that they just can't keep up and adapt to those plants over time, that's the deal with invasive plants or invasive animals the world over, is that you introduce an invasive predator or one that the bird has not adapted with over time. And so the predator has the advantage. Well, in the same case, an invasive plant has the advantage because it doesn't have any natural predators or other plants who go after it. So it has that advantage. So this is what he's battling for these acres and acres of mowed lawns. So the way Doug Tallamy got into this is he bought some land in Delaware, and he was finding that on one oak, there were hundreds and hundreds of caterpillars all over it compared to a Bradford pear, which had 2. And so he was noticing right in front of himself that on his native plants, there were a ton of insects, and on the non-native ones, there were none. So this is the new book by Doug Tallamy, The Nature of Oaks. I haven't bought it yet, but I read a few interviews with him about the book. And I really liked these quotes. Oaks are the most productive plant in this country. Over 900 species of Lepidoptera, which is an order of insects, including butterflies and moths. 900 species, and most of them are moths, use oaks, and there's no other genus of plant that comes close to that. So the reason that's important is caterpillars are eating the leaves and transferring more energy from plants to other animals in the food web than any other type of plant eater. So measuring the caterpillars in your system then is a really good way to measure how well that energy is being transferred out of the plant and out of that system around to other parts of the ecosystem, into birds, into wildlife, into many other things. So I would really encourage you to watch this closing keynote address that Doug Tallamy gave to Missouri River Bird Observatory's Birds and Bees Festival. It was a few months ago. So if you just Google Doug Tallamy, I'll give you a second to write it down, or you can watch the recording of the presentation. It's so good. It's like a 40-minute presentation. He is just so articulate and just tells such a cool story with great photos, and he's just a great storyteller. This is the lawn in front of our little boy's school. They took their whole front yard, which is relatively small, and they planted a native prairie in it. And it's not a real prairie, right? It's reconstructed, but they planted native prairie plants in it, and it's crazy. It takes a few years for it to look this bushy and beautiful, but there is so much going on in there that is good for insects and birds. This is from another angle, and it looks crazy, but it's so good. It's so good. So you have to be able to let go of your manicured lawn a little bit, but it does it's such an important change to make. This is another angle. I just think it looks so awesome. This morning, it was interesting. There were ants all over the milkweeds. Like half of this yard is common milkweed back in the back in front of the door. And there were ants all over it. And that's just so interesting too, to teach the kids about. And anyway, this is our backyard. It also looks a little nuts. So you see that line of smooth sumac along the road over there. We have a native plant bed up front with a big grow native sign trying to tell people about it. We have our gardens in the middle. And then we have another native plant bed over to the right. So again, it looks kind of crazy, but it's big and bushy and it helps support a lot of birds and insects. And we get to watch, look for monarch caterpillars on the milkweed, and it's great. Okay, so if you own larger acreage or property, or you know someone who does, that you can manage for wildlife, I really encourage you to check out our Missouri Bird Conservation Plan technical section. So it was written for you. So this plan was written by conservation partners in the state, not just the conservation department where I work, but we brought together all the people who had knowledge of bird response to land management. So we brought in grassland bird people, we brought in wetland bird people, forest bird people who do that research here in the state. And it outlines our most threatened bird species in the state, and then how you can manage land for breeding habitat for these species, because they're declining rapidly and they really need your help. This plan was written for anyone, public or private landowner, anybody who has land or just wants to learn about declining birds. We tried to write it in a very accessible way to provide context and background for why the heck, again, you should even care about birds. So I can have Lauren maybe provide that link in a follow-up email, or if you just Google MDC bird plan technical section, you'll find it as well. Another piece of advice I'll give you, if you do have acreage or land or know someone who does, who is interested in supporting these species, contact a private lands conservationist in your county. So this is just a screenshot from our mdc.mo.gov website. And up at the top, you just click contact and you can search by county for what your private land conservationist, where they are and who they are near you. Okay, next one. I better hurry up. I'm only on number 2. Okay, avoid pesticides for a bird-friendly home. So I don't have too much on this. This is my only slide, but following in the vein of what we just talked about with native plants, food web, this impacts the food web clearly in your yard or on your property. If you kill all the insects, of course, it's disturbing that food web. And so native plants, this is another thing, is when you get in, if you're new to native plants and you grow a lot and plant a lot, and then the next year you're like, oh, they're all getting eaten by insects. They're all chewed up and getting eaten by insects. Well, that's the point. That's a good thing. That's supposed to happen. So that's all part of it too. So I found myself too, that you just need to chill a little bit on everything looking like perfect and pristine, because it's helping the greater good and it just looks a little wilder. So just like we talked about, native plants equals native insects equals native birds equals native diversity. And the more diverse your system is, the healthier your system is, because if there are stochastic events like drought or heavy rains or things like that, these plants that have adapted to Missouri's climate and, our changes in rain, these plants are already adapted to those things. You don't have to water them every single day. They know how to deal with things like that. And we found in our yard that, in wet years, we see different flowers blooming at different times of year. And in dry years, you see different things. So it's kind of neat. Next one. Coffee? What does coffee have to do with birds? Drink bird-friendly coffee. Okay, so I said the one other one was my favorite one, but this one's my favorite one. So this is one you may not know about. So this is, it's my favorite one because it tastes awesome and it's quite self-serving. So what is bird-friendly coffee? And so I just put up a few abundance maps here year-round to show you where a lot of our, most common birds overwinter. So this is a wood thrush on the left. If you're near a forested habitat and you hear eole and it sounds really fluty and like ethereal, that's a wood thrush. And this is where they're most abundant in breeding in red, and then where they're most abundant during their overwintering down in the Yucatan and Central America in blue. So on the right, you see an indigo bunting. Wow, an indigo bunting. They say sweet, sweet, choo, choo, sweet, sweet. And they're found anywhere there's shrubby areas along trees. And they are beautiful. And you can see where they're most abundant during breeding in red, and then where they migrate through in yellow, and then where they're most abundant in blue. So you can see a lot more in Mexico, but you see all through that very tiny space. That's another thing. You think about all the birds that breed across the US and Canada, all the way up there in that map. And then all those birds spread out on territories breeding, and then they all migrate down to a very constricted space, a very, very tiny constricted space. And they're all smashed in there together. So we have to care about what happens to these birds when they're on the wintering grounds, because the habitat down there is almost more important because it's housing way more birds at a very crucial time of year. So let me illustrate this in a little bit different way. These maps were made by Partners in Flight, which is, again, a group of groups across the Western Hemisphere, really, that helps protect birds throughout their full life cycle, migratory birds throughout their full life cycle. So again, a third of our breeding birds leave the country completely in the non-breeding season. This is a map of 42 priority bird species that breed in Missouri. You see there in the yellow. And then the map has overlaid all 42 species wintering grounds. So it shows you where are the most important regions for us to protect as a state for our birds that breed down there. This shows you where our breeding birds that are priority species are most concentrated, where they most overlap. And so you can see that that part of the world really overlaps with the coffee belt, where a lot of the world's coffee is grown. So this is sun coffee on the left. So you can see that the overstory trees are removed. It's kind of like our corn or soybeans here in Missouri, right? There's no trees over top. It's a monoculture. It's just coffee. That it was cleared for that. That's what grows there. This is shade-grown coffee. So which do you think is more bird friendly? So shade-grown coffee leaves a canopy of trees over top, and that canopy of trees provides a place for all of our migratory birds, again, that are smashed in that tiny, tiny range. It gives all of them a place to forage and eat insects and fatten up and have a nice, happy winter in a tropical area where they can just eat all winter and then get real fat and have the energy to fly almost 1,000 miles back up to us to breed and have their babies. So it's very important that they are sustained down on the wintering grounds. So threats of deforestation, no regulation in a lot of land use down in this part of the world is a major threat to these migratory birds. So anything we can do to maintain or protect these forests with coffee growing underneath is great. So it's actually really interesting. Prior to the 1950s and 60s, all coffee was grown in this way. This is the traditional way to grow coffee. It's grown in the shade because it grows a higher quality, better tasting coffee. So in the 50s and 60s, farmers or ag groups or whoever decided that if you grew sun coffee, you would get higher yields. You'd get more coffee beans off of your plants, but it was a lower quality coffee bean. And so they switched to that. A lot of folks switched to that just because it's easier in some ways, but it grows a lower quality coffee. So this is from the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Institute, and they have a certification program of bird-friendly coffee. So they look at suppliers, growers, they figure out what companies are sourcing beans from folks that are bird-friendly, which means not just shade trees up above, but they have to be native shade trees. You know, not all shade-grown coffee is bird-friendly. You can grow coffee in shade, but if it's not a native tree, it's not going to provide a whole lot for migratory birds. So this illustrates that. You see shade-grown coffee on the left. It supports about 61 bird species. They'll use those areas. They've done bird surveys and figured this out. There's partial shade, which is a little bit better. It supports 79 bird species. But then you look at bird-friendly shade-grown coffee, and it supports 243 bird species. So that's shocking. That's a very big difference. And so you can just see that the more structure, again, diversity that your system has, it's able to support a broader range of species and sustain them over the winter. So this is a really cool picture from the early 1900s I found of a coffee farm in Costa Rica. And again, traditionally, this is how things were grown. Coffee was grown in the shade. So again, the Smithsonian Bird Friendly Coffee, they have a certification program. And if you're curious or wanting to change your behaviors to buy this coffee, it's a little bit more expensive. You know, it's like a few dollars extra a pound, but we've been drinking Bird Friendly Coffee from one of our conservation partners that I've met over the years for over a year now. It costs a little bit more. We are by no means wealthy, but we're trying to spend our money where we know we can make a direct difference. And this is definitely one way to help our migratory birds every single day when you drink your coffee. I need to do it more, but talk to your local coffee shop and ask if they'll, you know, do some research on this and carry a bird friendly coffee, you know, just one and try it out. But it's really good coffee. It's the best coffee I've ever had. It's not like I'm just grinning and bearing it because it's bird friendly. It's really good. It's way better. You can go on their website, put in your zip code and find suppliers of bird friendly coffee. There are also suppliers if you Google bird friendly coffee online. But near us in central Missouri, I almost said Central America, near us in central Missouri, you can find suppliers at Bird's Eye View in Jefferson City, Clover's Natural Market, and Natural Grocers. Bird friendly. Okay, bird friendly beef. This is another really cool market-based conservation that you can do by spending a few extra bucks to help birds. So the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program works with ranchers to, change their land management to bird friendly habitat improvements. And then they literally get Audubon stamped on the packages of their meat to show that they're bird friendly. And so again, if you Google Audubon, where to buy conservation ranching products, you can find suppliers near you. I think there are a few suppliers here in Missouri, one of which is Root Cellar, which is found here in Columbia and Jeff City. So that's another way that we can change our habits pretty easily and make a direct impact. Okay. What was that bird in the background? White-throated sparrow. Keep cats indoors to save birds. Okay. Go away, slide. Okay, so cats, I'm going to admit they're a really tough one. So people love birds, but they really love their cats. And this is always a touchy subject. So I'm just going to say that outright right up front. So harken back to the beginning of this presentation when we saw that cats were the leading human-caused threat to wild bird mortality or to wild birds living. And these numbers really don't lie, but there are solutions. So they're really cool solutions if you ask me. So ABC has been working on this topic the most, and they provide the most information for you online. So you can Google, and ABC has a website that's all about cats. And some of the really cool solutions for having an enclosed outdoor space for your cat outside is called a catio. And so look at these things. There are millions. I just also have to say, there are millions of bird watchers who are also cat owners. So no one here hates cats. And just because folks support this and ask you to keep cats indoors, it doesn't mean we hate cats. I used to be a cat owner. She was our baby. We kept her inside. And so it's safer for your kitty, and it's safer for birds and other wildlife, not just birds, but mammals and reptiles and amphibians. But aren't these things awesome? I really wish we'd built one of these for our cat when she was still living. But they're really cool. And then your cat gets to enjoy time outside, but wildlife is still safe. So next one. Avoid single-use plastics to protect birds and the planet. Okay, so this is a good one. So as we know, plastic is not biodegradable. It just breaks down into tinier and tinier pieces, which all eventually end up in the ground or in our waterways and eventually in the ocean. So here in Missouri, we're landlocked, so this one might not be at top of mind. But again, those major rivers, we have those major rivers. And so we can all be a little bit more conscientious, I think, including myself, about being more sustainable and using multi-use plastics or avoiding them altogether. So I know this is one where it can be really hard. It stresses me out, honestly, when I grocery shop, because you can't buy certain things without buying plastic in some way. It's very frustrating to me personally. So hopefully some of those things will change over time. So it can be tough. But I challenge all of us to try and make little changes in this. So I've gotten reusable produce bags that I take to the store, so I don't have to use those little thin plastic produce bags, and you just throw them in the wash and they're easy. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach this. So many of us know about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is where the ocean currents all kind of make these floating plastics all come together into these massive islands. It's just really crazy to see things like this. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You know, we are landlocked. We don't go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So it's not like we're going to come upon this. And I know there are a lot of efforts, large scale efforts to kind of wrangle all this trash in one place. But that trash, again, has to go somewhere. So just trying to reduce that over time is always a good thing. And it's really sad. You see this picture of an albatross, which has seen something shiny in the water. They think that it's a fish, and then they feed it to their young as well. And so sometimes they're feeding their young plastic and they just die of starvation because they're being fed plastic and they're eating plastic. This whole stomach is full of plastic. Oh my God, it's rough. So if we could use less. Oh, she's happy. I love that one. Share your sightings on eBird. Okay, so this is a really cool topic too. So reporting bird sightings, you're like, well, how's that going to help anything? Well, if you submit it, if you participate in the North American Breeding Bird Survey, you have to know your birds by sight and sound, but you conduct a route every year. We talked about this at the very beginning of the program, that these data helped track the bird declines over the last 50 years. The Breeding Bird Survey began in 1966. And the time scale of the bird declines was since 1970. So all of that is on the same time scale because it's a lot of data. It's our longest term bird survey over time. And then the Audubon Christmas bird count, as I mentioned at the top of the program as well, it tracks birds in the winter. So it's trying in both times of year to figure out what birds are around as a measure of that. So the Christmas bird count has been around since 1901. So it's the longest running bird census of its kind, and it's still going. And I participate in both of them every year. So if you know your birds by sight and sound, it's also a fun way to learn your birds. So you can join in with a Christmas bird count group or go along with someone on a breeding bird survey and learn a lot that way. But what's eBird? So eBird is really cool. It's a website, ebird.org. It's also a mobile app. And it's a mega database with millions of birder checklists. So it started out as a way for bird nerds, I say that with love, I'm a bird nerd as well, to upload their birding checklists on their phone. And they can store all of their bird sightings in one place and look at them by county and year and state and just ooze over your life list and remember all your fun birding adventures. And so this database is massive. There's 56 million checklists for birds worldwide. It's not just in the US, this is global. There's 692,000 eBirders, which means people who have registered on eBird. There are hundreds of millions of bird sightings entered on eBird every single year. They're nearing about 1 billion bird detections on eBird, and it's only been around since like 2009. There are regional experts who check eBird lists for rarities or weird birds. So it's not like you can just put in any bird you want. So it's accurate and checked upon. It's in real time. So if me and Kip and Abram decide to go to Eagle Bluffs Conservation Area tomorrow, we can look on eBird right this second and see what people have seen today, or right this second, or on the drive out to Eagle Bluffs, I can look on eBird and see what people saw 2 minutes ago. It's all real time. And so that's really cool and helpful for bird nerds who are out there chasing birds and they want to see a certain bird or they're making a list or something like that. So it helps you manage your life list, which is the list of birds you've seen in your life and your bird sightings, but it's also the largest citizen science effort ever. And it's only been around since 2009, and it's the biggest. So when you submit on eBird, you're adding the worldwide data, and eBird has gotten so large that it's adding to science and monitoring and conservation because the app is available in over 40 languages. Again, this is global. So this is the eBird checklist leaderboard. So the US has the most checklists of 38.2 million checklists that have been submitted. And when I made this presentation, every time I give any sort of eBird presentation, I updated it on 6.2. I haven't updated it in the last 2 weeks. I'm sure there's more. But last time I updated this in January of 2020, there were 28 million checklists. So since that time, 10 million checklists in less than a year and a half have been submitted. So this is major. This is also a powerful outreach tool to show the breadth and scope and constant activity of eBird. This is the live submission map. So when you go on their website, you can look at this world map. And I checked this on June 2nd at noon, and 19,362 checklists had been submitted that day already by noon across the world. And each of those light gray dots is a checklist that people had submitted that day by noon. And the yellow dots are checklists that were being submitted the second I took the screenshot. There's a ton. And between the time that I took the screenshot and wrote down in that text 362 at the end, there had been 61 checklists submitted between when I put the screenshot on the slide and then typed it. It's just, there's a lot of people out there birding. Don't underestimate birders. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Okay, so it's also cool because you can look up, like I said, Eagle Bluffs. It's a hot spot. All conservation areas and state parks and a billion other places are hot spots, which means you can look at that and see what birds have been seen at that area. So if I zoom in here, they're color coded by how many species have been detected. So Eagle Bluffs has about like 312, 311 species. So it's that orange marker you see right there. When I click on it, takes me to the Eagle Bluffs Conservation Area page. So these are the species that have seen most recently on June 2nd. You can organize those by which bird was first seen, the high counts. eBird is the marriage of computer nerds and bird nerds. And it formats all this data in really cool ways that you can see and learn from. So you can also look by species. So you say, I want to see a cerulean warbler. Where can I see a cerulean warbler in the state? So you go to a species map, you type in cerulean warbler, and these are all checklists where cerulean warbler have been detected ever. You can change that date range up in the top in blue to say, where have people seen a cerulean warbler this month in Missouri? And then, or in the last 2 days, and you can go to that spot. So when I zoom in, these are all the checklists where people have detected a cerulean warbler ever. So you click on one of these markers and it shows all the lists at that spot where someone detected a cerulean warbler. And then if you look at the one with the audio, this person took audio of the bird singing. This one made a comment. This one took a picture. So you can look at a picture of a cerulean warbler. It's just really, really cool. Now, since it's contributing to conservation so much, they can make really cool graphics. So this is an abundance map where it's darker purple. That's where the bird is more abundant. And now that there are so many bird checklists from around a bird's life cycle, both on the wintering grounds down south and up on the breeding grounds, they can create these full life cycle animations to show where these birds are and where they're most abundant all throughout the year. So this is the wood thrush, the fluty ELA one you hear in the forest that we talked about earlier. When I hit the button, it'll take you through weeks of the year and it shows the bird's abundance changing over the year. So you see they're hanging out in the Yucatan and other countries. Then around May, they hop the Gulf, and this is where they're most abundant in the eastern US. Then it's fall, they start to gather together, and then they hop the Gulf again, and they're back down on the Yucatan. And so this is a really powerful tool for education, for teaching kids, for teaching anyone about migration, because it visualizes it, and it's really, really cool. I mean, migration is the hook itself, because it's almost a miracle how these little bitty birds can fly all that far and face all those threats and still survive. This is a Western bird. It's a grassland bird. I thought I needed representation of both a forest bird and a grassland bird. And this is a resident bird. They're not a long distance migrant, but it shows you the short distance of their migration. So this is the winter, and then it moves into breeding season. They move up west onto those open grasslands. Fall, they come together, and then in the winter, they move a little bit farther south so that it's not as cold, but they're still on grassland areas. So all of this can help inform conservation efforts. It tells us, well, the Texas panhandle and northern Texas and Kansas and Nebraska are very important for wintering western meadowlarks, whereas in the breeding season, they're more important up north in the northern Midwest. And so all of this feeds into conservation, land management, what areas are most important for birds when. So that's why eBird and submitting your bird sightings is so, so important. So that's all I have for you tonight. That's all. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of information. It can be very heavy, but I would challenge all of us to look at our day-to-day and see what small changes we can make to help our birds, because Lord knows they need it. You saw the trends. Birds and lots of our natural world are kind of hurting right now. So, birds have always been surveyed as an indicator of the greater ecosystem. They're mobile. If they don't like a habitat or the habitat is unhealthy, they're able to leave. But many other wildlife don't have wings and they aren't able to fly. And so they act as an indicator of how healthy our ecosystems are. So I know change is never easy. Human behavior is probably the hardest thing to change. But if the pandemic honestly has taught me anything, it's that we can adapt and we can make some small changes to help our feathered friends, and or they will keep declining. And who wants that? Because birds are awesome. So thank you, everybody. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That's fascinating. And I really would like to not be mowing my lawn anymore. So I feel like that the
Right?
planting natives is going to be my number one strategy.
That is a
I,
positive. And they found, Lauren, I forget the exact percent, but they found that if you wait an extra like 3 or 4 days to mow your lawn, it increases your bee diversity by like 10 or 15%. If you wait a week to not mow it, it increases by even more. So yeah, you just don't mow your lawn. You're just helping the insects.
that's right. I'm going to put up a little sign that says that's what I'm doing. So people, my neighbors will be fine with it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so someone has asked, what is the name of the product you made the window squares with, and where do you find it?
Yeah, so I ordered that from American Bird Conservancy, but I don't think that they sell that exact product anymore. It was called ABC Bird Tape, but there are companies like Kaleidoscape. There are a ton of companies that make these opaque stickers. If you just Google like bird collision window stickers, there are a lot of products online, and any of those work as long as you put the sticker on the outside of the window, not inside your house, because a lot of people put those bird silhouettes on the inside of your window, and a bird can't always see that. Sometimes there's glare on the outside of the window and they'll never see a sticker on the inside. So you have to put the stickers on the outside. It really doesn't matter what it looks like. But there are products that, are those opaque things that don't break up your field of view very badly. You can still see out the window and it's not like ruining your window and your view. But really anything to break up that reflection is good. So I would just do a Google search. I can't really tell you a product to buy technically, but yeah, they sell a lot of those opaque stickers online. Just make sure you put them on the outside.
Someone else has asked, by putting out sunflower seeds in feeders, are we making birds dependent and less likely to survive?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that question a lot about hummingbird feeders as well. Are we keeping birds from migrating? And absolutely not. No, anytime we feed birds, whether it's through putting up a bird feeder or planting native plants, we're just supplementing their natural food sources. Birds know what proteins and nutrients they need when they need it. And so they will leave your feeders in the fall. This is another thing I get questions every fall of all my birds are gone. They must all be dead. They're gone. And fall is the time of year where all the plants and native plants and plants in general go to seed. So there's a ton of natural food source out there. That's when berries ripen oftentimes. And so the birds, they're at your feeder and they can seem very dependent, but it's just convenient. Most wildlife will do the easiest thing, like the path of least resistance, but they know what they need when they need it. And so they will move around the landscape. They will continue on migration, which is cued by like day length and things like that. Other things within their system that tells them to migrate. So no food source will really keep them in one spot or make them too dependent. So that's a good question.
Another question, I think, can birds become myopic, which I guess is like that. Can their eyesight become such that they don't see very well? And I think I'm wondering if that question is related to the flying into buildings.
I don't know. I might need some clarification on that one.
Okay. Well, Stephen, if you can clarify that question. We'll move on to another one in the meantime. What about non-native species of birds? Is there a risk of those birds taking over?
Yeah, so they have in some ways, some species. So our non-native species here in Missouri are house sparrows, European starlings, and domestic pigeons or rock pigeons. And so pigeons aren't really, they're in our urban areas, but I don't think they're displacing too many other birds. They've just adapted to urban life. And really that's the case for house sparrows and European starlings too. They've just adapted to human impacted areas. And there's a lot of those. But yeah, house sparrows can be really nasty to deal with. They can be very aggressive and kill eastern bluebirds, like in the boxes. They can really compete for those. So I don't think that they'll ever take over because they do seem to be very limited to human impacted environments. And most of our birds that are declining, they're not found in human impacted environments. They're found in the more threatened habitats like wetlands or grasslands, like I mentioned, where those are experiencing human impacts as well. Growing food, in our ag systems, I think is the reason for a lot of our grassland bird decline. But it's hard to make that argument that, birds are ever going to be more important for, humans and growing food for humans. And so it's a tough argument to make. But I don't think they'll ever take over. I think, and I hope that they'll kind of stick to our urban areas, but those are getting larger and larger. But yeah.
So Ria, you got your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question?
I accidentally touched it.
Oh, okay. That's just fine.
Sorry.
Thanks for letting us know. That's okay. We do have another question about declawing cats. If cats are declawed, their front paws, is that safer for the birds?
I think it's safer, but I think cats can still, kind of catch things even without claws, and they can catch them even without claws, and then they just use their teeth. So it is better, but yeah, it's better.
Okay.
It's better, but it's still not, like fixing the whole problem. But
Right.
It is one way, that you can try and curb it, but they still catch stuff. They're good. They're good hunters. I mean, that's just how they adapted. That's not on them. They're just being cats. That's the hard part.
Right.
They can't help it, but they are predators, and it's their natural instinct to hunt things. And so it's like, at what intersection do you want to, I guess, allow that to happen, have them be outside, or just try and lessen that risk both to the cat and to wildlife by keeping them inside? So
we have another question. Is there a way that we humans can help birds get rid of mites or mange?
So I think mites, like nest mites, I don't think that birds get mange, because I think that's mostly in mammals, but I don't think so. I don't think there's anything you can do about mites and predation of nests and things like that. All that is just a natural part of the system. Really, mites can be an issue if a bird reuses the same nest or reuses the same area over and over and over all summer long. Like in nest colonies, they can be an issue because there's a lot of nests concentrated in one place, and mites can spread really quickly. So there's really not a way you can treat them or put anything in a nest, if that's what you're talking about, that wouldn't also hurt or affect the birds and their young in the nest. So
the grow native plants, or the native plants, are there places locally that are good providers of that? I know you can't recommend one over the other, but do you know?
Yeah, there are a lot of providers. So I would go to, I think I'm not going to make up the Missouri Prairie Foundation's URL because I don't remember it, but Google Missouri Prairie Foundation.
Okay.
Or grownative.org is the website. And that has a database of all the suppliers in the state where you can look up exactly where to go to buy native plants. So that's one of the best things about that website, is it has this massive database of all the plants and how tall they get, where they grow. It's this massive database. But it also tells you what suppliers carry native plants, because that can be really hard to track them down and find what areas do provide that. But they do all that legwork for you, and it's on there.
How important is providing water, like bird baths, to birds?
Steven's got so many good questions.
Good questions, yeah.
Thanks for being so engaged, Stephen. That's great. So it is important. A lot of people, millions and millions of people feed birds, and I'm sure millions and millions of people provide water. But providing water to birds in your yard is almost just as important. But it takes work. There are things you have to do to make both your bird feeders and your bird baths safe for birds. And so sometimes throughout the winter, people say, "Oh, I have blind birds." And especially finches, whether it's house finches or goldfinches or purple finches, they're very susceptible to, oh my gosh, what's the pink eye? Conjunctivitis. And it's kind of like pink eye in birds. And what happens is, birds are eating seed out of, like if it's a tray where birds can poop, the bacteria builds up and then they're eating that. And then they spread it to each other, and it makes their eyes crusty like pink eye, and it can crust them closed, and then they can't see what they're doing, and they're just sitting on the feeder, and you can get really close to them because they can't see you. So it puts them in danger. And so wash your bird feeders in the winter, maybe like once a month. And especially if you see crusty-eyed birds, take them down for 2 weeks and wash them so that the birds can disperse. They aren't concentrated in one location, spreading it to each other. So take the feeders down for a week or two so the birds can go somewhere else, and they can get better. They can get better from the conjunctivitis, but But yes, bird baths are very important as well. Birds, you'll have a lot more productive bird yard if you have water in it. And especially if you have a water feature or running water, birds can hear that from, up high. And so they really key in on the water in addition to food. And so it's kind of next level to provide a really high quality bird bath. Take your bird yard to the next level. But yeah, you have a water feature or water, and you just get a lot bigger diversity of birds, but you have to clean it. You have to clean it probably every few days or once a week. And you have to, do a very low level bleach solution. Don't use like just your dish soap because it might make the water smell funny. So it just takes extra maintenance to keep your birds healthy.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we are just about out of time. So like Sarah mentioned, we have recorded this program and we will be putting it on the library's YouTube channel when our magical PR team has had a chance to edit it. If you want to check out recordings of past events, you can visit the page I just posted in the chat, dbrl.org/events, and look at the recently live section. There's also a button there that takes you to all recordings of past events to get our hit our YouTube channel. Sarah, on behalf of the library, I just really want to thank you for sharing your time and this really valuable information with us this evening. And I want to thank all of our attendees as well for your good questions and attention. And thanks to all of you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your evening and be well.
Thanks so much, everybody.